A highly unusual weather pattern is developing, and it's expected to bring even more flooding along with widespread severe weather. Today, dangerous and potentially life-threatening flooding will continue across Texas as repeated rounds of thunderstorms move over the same locations again and again. At the same time, a huge plume of wildfire smoke from Canada is spreading south, creating hazardous air quality across parts of the Midwest and Northeast. Looking ahead to the weekend, the weather pattern remains very active, with multiple rounds of severe storms possible from the Great Lakes through the Ohio Valley and into the East Coast. There is a lot to cover in today's forecast, but first let's take a look at what unfolded yesterday in Texas. Catastrophic flooding impacted several communities, and a tornado also touched down in San Antonio. This footage, captured by storm chaser Tornado Page, shows ongoing water rescues in Bourne, Texas, where a flash flood emergency had been issued. Some locations received an astonishing 12 to 24 inches of rainfall, and unfortunately, additional heavy rain is expected today. This next video, provided by Camden, shows the tornado that moved through San Antonio yesterday. You can clearly see power flashes as the tornado remained on the ground for several minutes. Radar also detected a debris signature, confirming the strength of the storm. Thankfully, there have been no reports of injuries or fatalities so far, but damage was reported near the Six Flags area on the north side of San Antonio. Unfortunately, the threat is far from over. Flooding and tornado risks will continue today as another moderate risk for excessive rainfall remains in effect. Communities including Kerrville, Uvalde, Junction, and San Angelo, areas that have already been hit hard by days of heavy rain, are once again facing the possibility of major flooding. Even San Antonio is expected to receive several more inches of rainfall. The good news is that by Friday, the flood threat should gradually begin to shift away from this region. Although a few lingering showers and thunderstorms may still be around, the overall flooding threat on Friday is expected to become much more isolated compared to today. Now let's take a closer look at the future radar and see what is expected over the next 48 hours across the southern plains. As we begin today, heavy rain is already falling across parts of Texas, especially around Rock Springs and Kerrville. This rain is expected to continue through the late morning before gradually weakening during the afternoon. However, if a few isolated supercells develop near San Antonio later today, an isolated tornado cannot be ruled out. Aside from that, scattered showers and thunderstorms are expected to continue into tonight. Another corridor of heavy rainfall is likely to develop this evening and continue overnight, affecting areas including Kerrville, San Antonio, Uvalde, and Junction. Residents in these locations should prepare for another round of significant rainfall through the night. By tomorrow morning, another serious flash flood threat could begin to develop around San Angelo and Sonora, creating the potential for additional flooding problems in those communities. The heavy rain threat is not limited to Texas. Across the desert southwest, the monsoon pattern remains active and is expected to bring widespread rainfall over the next 48 hours. For many areas of Texas and the southwest, the next 1 to 2 days are expected to be extremely challenging due to repeated rounds of rain. Across Arizona and New Mexico, most locations are forecast to receive around 1/10 of an inch to as much as 1 or 2 inches of rainfall. However, a few isolated spots, particularly near Tucson and Phoenix, could receive closer to 2 or even 3 inches. Even so, Texas remains the primary concern. Current HRRR model projections continue to indicate a very concerning setup, with some locations potentially receiving up to 24 inches of rainfall over the next 48 hours. Most of this rain is expected to fall today, especially in the Kerrville and Junction areas. Some isolated locations could even receive more than half a foot of rain, making this another extremely dangerous day for flooding across the region. Keep this in mind. If you live in Uvalde, San Antonio, or nearby areas, don't assume you'll avoid the heavy rain just because the HRRR model isn't showing large rainfall totals there. In fact, the model has already been somewhat inaccurate with today's rainfall forecast. Earlier this morning, the heaviest rain actually developed closer to Uvalde, even though the model was only predicting around an inch of rainfall there. That suggests some of these locations could end up receiving much more rain than the current forecast indicates. Flooding is certainly a major concern, but it's far from the only weather story over the next 7 to 10 days. Another important development will be a significant shift in the jet stream pattern beginning this weekend and continuing into next week. Right now, the jet stream features a broad deep across the northeast, but so far it hasn't produced any major weather events. By Saturday, however, that deep is expected to deepen, increasing the chances for severe weather across the Great Lakes and the Northeast on both Saturday and Sunday as a storm system moves through the region. This setup could bring a widespread threat of damaging winds over the weekend and into the early part of next week. By Monday and Tuesday, the jet stream is forecast to deep even farther south across the Midwest. That pattern could once again create favorable conditions for significant severe weather, especially around cities like Chicago and Minneapolis on Tuesday. Looking ahead to Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, the deep in the jet stream is expected to become even more pronounced, allowing a much cooler air mass to spread across much of the northeast. At the same time, a strong area of high pressure is expected to remain parked over the southern plains. This will help build intense heat throughout the region over the next 7 days, making conditions increasingly hot across Texas by the end of next week. Beyond that, as we approach the end of July and head into next weekend, forecast confidence begins to decrease, and there is still considerable uncertainty regarding how the overall weather pattern will evolve. As we move toward the end of July and into early August, the overall weather pattern does appear as though it could become quite active. However, there is still a great deal of uncertainty in the forecast beyond the next 7 days, so the details remain far from certain. In the shorter term, Saturday is beginning to look increasingly concerning for severe weather across the Great Lakes, Ohio Valley, and the Northeast. According to the latest Rufus model, a large cluster of thunderstorms is expected to develop north of Toronto by Saturday afternoon, while additional storms may also form across parts of Michigan during the day. The biggest concern is that these storms could organize into a widespread damaging wind event during the late afternoon and evening. The threat zone could extend from Springfield and Peoria all the way east to Burlington, Vermont, creating the potential for a significant wind event across a large portion of the region. Current model guidance indicates that many of these thunderstorm clusters could produce wind gusts between 60 and 70 miles per hour. Because of that, there is a growing possibility that Saturday will bring a widespread damaging wind threat across much of the Ohio Valley and the Northeast. Areas such as Harrisburg, Scranton, and even Washington, D.C. could be affected during the late evening and overnight hours before the storm system gradually moves offshore by Sunday morning. Another noticeable change will be the temperatures. Saturday afternoon highs are expected to reach the lower 90s in many locations, but by Sunday morning, much cooler air will arrive. Low temperatures across parts of upstate New York and Vermont could fall into the 50s, providing a noticeable break from the recent heat. Overall, this is expected to be just one of several storm systems moving through the region over the next 7 days. After the weekend, the active weather pattern is likely to continue, and by Sunday into Monday, another storm system could begin moving into the Midwest and Great Lakes, bringing another round of unsettled weather. This could bring another round of severe weather. However, the exact location and intensity of any storms during those 2 days remain highly uncertain at this point. Tuesday of next week could also bring a threat of severe weather along parts of the East Coast. That said, forecast models continue to disagree on exactly where the strongest storms may develop, so confidence in the details remains fairly low. By Tuesday night into Wednesday, surface high pressure is expected to build across the Great Lakes. As a result, Wednesday currently appears to be a relatively quiet weather day for much of the region. Looking farther ahead to Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, the forecast becomes even more uncertain. At this time, the main concern may be scattered mesoscale severe weather events, but it's still too early to determine exactly how things will unfold. Beyond that, as we approach the end of July, the atmosphere appears capable of producing a few larger storm systems, especially across parts of the Midwest where additional troughs may begin to develop. Even so, forecast uncertainty remains quite high, and the details will become clearer over the coming days. Another major concern right now is the widespread wildfire smoke covering much of the Midwest, Great Lakes, and Northeast. The smoke is coming from numerous wildfires that flared up across Canada just a few days ago. Strong winds in the upper atmosphere, blowing from the north and northwest, have carried the smoke deep into the Midwest and surrounding regions. While these winds are also bringing somewhat cooler air, they are unfortunately transporting a very dense layer of smoke, leading to significantly reduced air quality across a large area. Many people have already been sharing photos and reports on social media from places such as Warsaw, Detroit, and even New York City, describing poor visibility and worsening respiratory conditions as they deal with the smoke firsthand. The worst air quality is currently being observed across Michigan's Upper Peninsula and parts of New York, and these hazardous conditions are expected to continue for at least the next 24 to 48 hours. The latest HRRR model suggests the smoke may begin to thin somewhat by Friday, but it is still expected to linger across parts of Wisconsin and nearby areas. If you live in Virginia, be prepared for deteriorating air quality on Friday, as wildfire smoke is expected to move into the region. The smoke is also forecast to spread southward towards Charlotte and Raleigh during the day. By late Friday and into Saturday, there is a possibility that the smoke plume will begin shifting farther east. That means parts of Wisconsin could finally see some improvement in air quality sometime between late Friday and Saturday. However, confidence in the forecast remains limited because wildfire activity and smoke movement can change rapidly. The good news is that upper-level winds are expected to gradually steer the smoke more toward the east instead of pushing it farther southeast as we head into the weekend. If that pattern holds, some of the smoke may begin moving out over the Atlantic and away from the United States. Even so, some lingering smoke is still expected to remain across portions of the country. Meanwhile, hurricane season in the Atlantic is also beginning to draw attention. Although activity was relatively quiet last year, there are now two areas being monitored for possible tropical development. The first area is located in the far eastern Atlantic, just off the west coast of Africa. At this time, it has about a 10% chance of developing into a tropical system over the next 7 days. While development is possible, forecast confidence remains fairly low. The second area is receiving more attention because it is located just off the coast of Florida. A strong cold front is expected to move south from Canada and reach the region this weekend. As that front interacts with the warm waters near Florida, it could help a low-pressure system develop, creating at least a small chance for tropical development over the coming days. At this point, I'm not very confident that a hurricane will develop, and I also think the chances of a tropical storm forming in this area are fairly low. Strong wind shear is expected to make development difficult, so the environment is not particularly favorable for a well-organized tropical system. Even if no tropical cyclone forms, heavy rainfall remains a major concern. The greatest threat appears to be flooding, especially across areas including Jacksonville, Orlando, Tampa, and Daytona Beach, where periods of intense rain are expected. As this system moves northward along the coastline, there is still a possibility that some tropical development could occur. However, confidence remains low, and it appears unlikely that anything significant will form over the next several days. If development does happen, it would be more likely after the weekend rather than before it. For now, the primary concern is clearly the flooding rainfall. Whether or not a tropical system officially develops near Florida, the biggest weather story through the weekend and into early next week is expected to be the risk of excessive rain and flooding. According to the National Blend of Models, NBM, a broad area of heavy rainfall is forecast across portions of Florida, with the highest totals currently expected near Tampa, Spring Hill, and Cedar Key. Many of these areas could receive between 3 and 5 inches of rain from this weekend into early next week. Some locations, however, may receive considerably more. While the current model places the heaviest rainfall mainly offshore, there is still a chance that this rain band shifts inland. If that happens, isolated communities along the coastline could receive rainfall totals approaching 12 inches during the weekend and into the start of next week. Across central Florida and the state's east coast, the forecast remains more uncertain. Even so, most of central and northern Florida are still expected to receive around 2 to 5 inches of rainfall. As always, the forecast is likely to evolve over the coming days, and depending on how this tropical disturbance develops, areas farther north, including Cape Hatteras and Virginia Beach, could also experience periods of heavy rainfall. Another possibility is that this system never develops near Florida at all. Instead, it could organize farther offshore and potentially strengthen into a tropical storm, or even a hurricane, east of the Carolinas sometime next week. However, it is still very early in the forecast process, and there is a great deal of uncertainty surrounding how this system will evolve. At this stage, all potential scenarios remain on the table, so it's important to continue monitoring future forecasts as new information becomes available. Regardless of whether a tropical cyclone forms, this system could still become a significant coastal storm as we move through the weekend and into next week. As always, thank you so much for watching today's forecast. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future weather updates.